All right. Well, welcome everybody. Um, it is definitely a pretty interesting year here. I do miss being with all of you in person, but it is great to be with all of you in spirit here on YouTube. So that's kind of fantastic that we have these new ways that we can get together and communicate and work together. But anyway, so the talk today is going to be a little DevOps 101, mobile DevOps for Xamarin applications. If that's not why you're watching, I don't know why you're watching, but anyway. So obviously, I am Dan Siegel. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I work as a mobile app consultant. I do a lot of training and project rescues and kind of guidance on how to build different apps when I'm not actually building the app. So lots of things that I do, lots of really bad scenarios that I come across in my time. Of course, I am a mobile and DevOps champion, which is, kind of why I can speak on this subject. It's a huge passion of mine. And of course, a lot of you know me as an open source author and maintainer for the Prism library. A little shameless plug, because I have to have the shameless plugs. You can, of course, follow me there on Twitter, Twitch, subscribe to my YouTube. And something kind of newer this year is, they've opened up the GitHub sponsors, which is actually a really fantastic way that you can help to support your favorite open source libraries and maintainers. Whether it's me, whether it's someone else like Alan Ritchie, there are just so many of them out there. Definitely encourage you to kind of help keep open source sustainable. For those of you who maybe have a company budget, and I know there are some of you out there who do, talk to your boss and have them, kind of help those libraries that you guys are using and relying on to kind of, make money, right? So if you're making money off of it, give a little something back to the community. That way, those libraries are going to be around for a very long time for you. All right, so what is on the agenda today? So first up, we're going to talk about why DevOps is really so important. And we have a lot to talk about, so hopefully I don't talk too fast for all of you. If I do, the good thing is this is on YouTube, so you can always play it back at like 0.5x speed later, I guess, right? But we're going to talk about why it's so important and why you probably started your project wrong, as well as some common problems in code that we face, particularly in the Xamarin world. I think like a lot of developers, I actually came into Xamarin from a more web background. So I was used to having some sort of web config that I could have with my application. And that would, make it very easy for me to get things like connection strings and whatever settings I needed into my application without putting that directly into code. And there just isn't a way to do that very easily in Xamarin. So we're going to look at kind of, what some of those issues are and kind of how we might solve some of them. And then we're going to talk about my camera going out, apparently. So I will have to get that camera back here. My camera didn't have coffee, I guess. Let's see if I can get that back on here. Give me just a minute while I get that going again. Kind of love these technical glitches at first thing in the morning here. If I can, where did it go? Let's see. We'll get that back in a minute, I think, here. In any case, while I'm doing that, so we're going to talk about kind of getting started as well, setting up kind of a simple CI build with App Center. And then finally, I'm going to talk about why I actually prefer Azure Pipelines and kind of how you can use that to your benefit there. Let's see here. Let's fix this. I got sorry. Same time I'm trying to fix this camera. I think it's time for the new, what is it, the Hero 9 or whatever. This thing is, don't mind all the beeping. Let's see, get this going again, maybe. Of course, I just dropped. Yeah, well, that may be a little challenging, but anyway, let's get this going here. All right, so why DevOps is so important. The one of the big things I kind of come across a lot is I think that there's this sense that DevOps is really complex and really scary for a lot of developers. And that kind of keeps you from doing, what you need to do, while at the same time, you're making design decisions that are ultimately going to impact you and make your life just a little bit more difficult. And part of it is it's kind of like this giant puzzle, because you have a repo that you have to deal with, and you have kind of trigger A that has to work with project B, and you have to provision project B on developer site C and sign away your firstborn child. I know a few people with children. Luckily, I don't have any that I'm currently aware of or financially responsible for. But for my friends that do, I know a few of them that would gladly give away the first child. They're constantly trying to. Nobody seems to take them, though. Oh, well, I guess sucks to be them. In any case, one of the things you need to do is kind of ask, what are your project goals? And to do that, you kind of want to do like this little game of like this or that, right? So you want to ask, like, where is this going? My computer is like not happy this morning. I think I needed to get my computer coffee instead of me. But you want to ask, do you want to prove that you can write code, or do you want to actually solve a business problem? Now, that business problem could be that the birds are angry. If you didn't get that reference, I don't know where you've been, but you probably want to solve that business problem, right? You want to ask, do you want to just debug locally, or do you want to deploy to users? Do you want to be the center of attention, or do you want to take vacations? I know, well, we call it vacations here in America, but I know a lot of other people call it holiday, but whatever, we'll say vacations because I'm American and that's what we do. Do you want to worry about every release, or do you want to just get an email that something happened kind of overnight, right? I see this over and over and over again, and this is not in any shape, way, or form specific to Xamarin. This is purely a DevOps issue, where I see people that, that it's basically an all hands on deck event every single time you have a DevOps or any kind of release, right? And you have like your monthly release, and every single person in the programming department has to come in and deal with it and figure it out. And then inevitably there's some sort of problem, and you have to do a rollback, and nobody got a weekend, and everybody's upset, and reports are being written, and it's just not a good thing to be dealing with. And so we don't want to, we don't want to do that at all if we can at all avoid it. So let's just not, right? Like, we want DevOps as part of our process. But one of the things that so many people forget here is that, ultimately, DevOps is kind of, and really building your app is a lot like building a house. You wouldn't try to build the house before you built the foundation, right? Like, is it going to be a solid foundation? Do you need to put it on piers? Like, how does that look? If you didn't answer those questions, the house is not going to stand very long. It's going to fall over. And it's the same exact way with building your app. If you didn't start, knowing that you needed to have DevOps as part of it, you're probably going to make design decisions that are going to negatively impact your application. Oh, there we go. We're starting to get back here. Let's see if I can fix the zoom on this here. In any case, so you want to make sure that things are kind of being done correct from the beginning. And so that's why I wanted to kind of leave you with a quote. Well, okay, maybe not this quote, although it's probably true. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after we've tried everything else. But anyway, no, the real quote here is from a really good author, one of my favorite authors anyway, Stephen Covey. You want to begin with the end in mind, right? So when you begin with the end in mind, it's setting you up for success because you know roughly where you want to go, right? Like nobody knows for sure where they're going to end up, right? Like I don't think if you asked Bill Gates or if you asked Jeff Bezos or if you asked Elon Musk that would they be where they are today? I don't think any of them could have really dreamt that big and realize that they were going to get quite there. But they had to have a general direction that they absolutely wanted to go. And you have to do the same when you're building an app here. So my new app checklist probably looks a little bit different than yours. Now, what I see most people do is they open Visual Studio. So like the first parts are kind of the same. They open Visual Studio, they create a new project, and then they start building their app. See, my new app checklist is a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to configure the base project settings, things that are actually important that I need. Like I want to make sure that my bundle ID is correct, so I can go to the Apple developer portal, and get my provisioning profile set up and kind of get the signing certificate set up for development or production. But I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to close Visual Studio. I'm going to initialize that Git repo. I'm going to check it in. I'm going to push it to GitHub or Azure repos or Bitbucket, wherever I need to put the source for my source control. I'm going to put it up there as quick as possible. And it's a stupid, like there's nothing really unique about this, right? And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a DevOps pipeline. And I want to do that so that every design decision that I make is now revolving around this idea that, I have a CI build that needs to be dealt with, right? So that way, every single build, even if it's the hello world from the Xamarin.Forms template, or, even if I'm doing Xamarin native, right? So whatever that template gave me, I want to make sure that my client, or if I was, working for someone, I want my coworker or my boss to be able to download that and put that on their phone and run it without me having to be there or without me having to do anything. It should be very, very simple for them to do that. All right. So what are some common problems in code that we have, right? Well, I think probably one of the first things that we see, and no offense to Microsoft, love them. They make great products. They make some bad ones too, but it doesn't everybody. But one of the biggest problems is that, and this is not unique to Microsoft, this is the entire development world. For any technology that you're working with, you're going to get like the most basic hello world samples of how to get started with something. So, I'm going to pick on App Center here for a second, and we'll say that, okay, I went into App Center and, I created a new app in App Center. Well, they give me this kind of starter code to say, okay, we'll add these namespaces, add this line of code, and now you've got the App Center SDK running in your application, which is fine and dandy, but now you're checking in code that actually has the string for your client ID. And that's probably not what you want, because what I find is our applications don't live in this simplistic world where, you have one environment. In fact, it's probably one of my biggest complaints about App Center is that they always built this as if you have a single app on a single platform in a single environment. And that's not true, right? For any of us. We have an application that is on multiple platforms, and you're going to be dealing with multiple environments. You're going to have a dev environment. Well, some of us are going to have a stage environment. Some of us may have user acceptance testing that we have to go through. So that could be, its own environment with its own backend and everything else. And then we eventually get out to production, whatever that looks like. It could be an enterprise app. So we're not on the App Store, we're on some company portal somewhere, but it could also be in the App Store or on Google Play, right? You don't want this hard-coded, string here for your client ID where you're sending everything to one location. And now you're mixing up data from production and from dev and everything else. That's just going to be a huge, huge mess. So you obviously don't want this in your code. So how are you going to deal with that, right? Well, one way that I see over and over again, and don't worry, these, I literally went to randomGUIDgenerator.com or whatever it is. So these are not real IDs, just FYI. But I don't know, actually, maybe they are. I mean, I guess it's possible. If they are valid, it's not going to hit my account, so do whatever you want. But you can certainly create a static class like this, where now you have access to this, and it's not quite as bad, right? Like where you see the use of the ID is kind of separated a little bit. It's separated out into another class as a constant value. But that's still not very good because you're still checking this in, and maybe you had some sort of weird logic to try to figure out, was it a dev build? Was it a release build? Whatever. And I see that over and over where people do like if def kind of stuff to get the correct value. But that's still not a great solution. You're checking all that into source control. And this is really a configuration value that you need to figure out a little bit later. But it doesn't stop there, right? This is actually from the MSAL library docs. So the MSAL library, if you're not familiar with that, is the library from Microsoft to work with Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C for authentication. And they were actually nice enough to take my code sample and not give me any credit for it in their docs for Android. So that way you didn't have to do it in the XML, but whatever. I'm used to them stealing my stuff. In any case, so, you do have kind of this mix where you could actually do, this declaration in the Android manifest .xml for the browser tab activity. And then you need to add this data scheme with your client ID. And then you have like the info P list. Of course, you could also do this in code. So you have all of these different things, beyond just like App Center, right? Like this kind of pops up over and over and over. On the previous slide, like you probably saw, I had like a backend, right? Which of our apps don't have a backend, right? Like probably 99+% have some sort of backend that they're working with, and that backend probably is changing. If you're working on an app that consumes a public API, my guess is you may not be changing from one environment to the next, I guess. But I would say that's more of the edge case rather than the norm, right? So we want to have some way that we can kind of deal with this. And that's kind of why I always tell people just use the mobile build tools. So the mobile build tools, it's powered by MS Build. So you're not writing a script for every single project out there. Not all of us are Jerome LeBon that loves to write scripts apparently. But it's very simple, right? Like I can install a NuGet. It's build platform agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you decide that you want to use GitHub Actions or if you want to use Obveyor. There are literally more build platforms out there than I can remember off the top of my head. There are quite a few of them out there. But it will work anywhere that .NET will build, right? Because this is just MS Build. So anywhere that you can build a Xamarin application, it's going to work because you're going to use MS Build to build that. And it works for Xamarin Native as well as Xamarin.Forms and Uno platform. So this is just something that works across the board. It doesn't have to be specific to Xamarin.Forms or anything. In fact, I mean, parts of this actually work in Net Standard. So, it could work on a console application realistically. So what are some of the features here? Well, the core feature has always been about those secrets. So, I showed you that static class to kind of begin this. And that's always kind of been that core goal, was to kind of get that where I could generate that class at build rather than having to kind of check that class into source control. So we kind of have that. And in V2, which is currently in preview, there is going to be a new preview coming out probably in the next week or two. So I'll give you a little bit of a teaser on what is coming here very soon. With like the last couple things, but all the rest of it is actually available right now. So you have some improvements in V2 that it now supports every single primitive type out there. Why you would use some of them, I have no bloody idea. But they're there. And as well as some other common types that you might want to use, like URI or a GUID, datetime offset. All of those are there. You can also make things into an array if you need, like, it actually came up a while back where someone was saying, that they wanted to, have scopes, and that needed to be an array. And rather than kind of parsing that, in their code, they just kind of wanted it out of the box to be an array, which I can kind of understand. So that now works. One of the other things, and I know that this has kind of been a hot topic in the Xamarin.Forms community. It is a love or hate thing where either you love Xamarin.Forms CSS or you absolutely hate it. I don't really care which camp you're in. If you hate it, don't use it. If you love it, if you come from the web background, you probably love CSS like I do. And so the mobile build tools will actually give you the ability to use Sass and then generate the Xamarin.Forms compliant CSS, which just for the record, Xamarin.Forms CSS is not actually compliant CSS, just FYI. It will break linters. In any case, one of the other things it has done for quite a while is copy your IPA or APK. We also now do a lot of image processing. This includes like watermarking, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. There's now app config support in V2. It will generate some basic Git-based release notes for you, and there are going to be some improvements kind of coming over the next year on that as well. There's a whole JSON-based configuration that also has a schema, so that way you get the IntelliSense in your IDE or your editor, like VS Code. And then what's kind of coming in the next couple weeks, which I'm really excited about, is the tokenized info plist and Android manifest. So if we kind of were to go back and you saw the docs there from MSAL, we can now put some sort of token in there that will get replaced at build. So you're never checking in what the actual client ID is, but that will be in the actual generated info plist that is in the IPA or in the APK in the case of Android, depending which one you're doing, obviously. And then the other thing, which I always kind of found annoying, was there's no real good way to deal with your Apple push environment, right? Like you go, okay, well, it's development. Well, now I'm ready for release. What do I do? And so Mobile Build Tools V2 is also going to be dealing with that as part of that update as well. And it looks like my camera is really upset with me this morning. Oh, well, guys, I guess it is just not meant to be today. In any case, so kind of how do we deal with these secrets? Well, we're going to generate those app secrets and the configuration with a JSON file. And it's going to look basically like this, right? You're going to have a key, you're going to have a property, and we're just going to parse it. And there's a configuration file I'm not going to go into because we do have, a whole doc site that, if you go to mobilebuildtools.com, you can read all the docs on this at your leisure there. But this one file is very, very easy to exclude from source control. As a matter of fact, if you don't have an exclude for it in your git ignore, the Mobile Build Tools will actually ignore it automatically. It will add the ignore for you in V2. So on that simplified image handling, so I'm actually really kind of excited about the image handling that we're doing in version 2. So this has kind of been a long time issue that I've faced, and I know a lot of other people have faced as well, where you want to be able to have side-by-side installations of the same exact app. And obviously that's going to require that you have, a different app ID or bundle ID, for, dev or stage or production, whatever your different environment is. And, but the problem is you probably have the same icon, right? And now how do you handle the icons? And there are just so bloody many of them, all these different resolutions you got to deal with across Android and iOS. And it's really painful to deal with. And so what we're actually doing now is saying, look, all you need to worry about is that high resolution source image, and then all of the different output resolutions we're going to deal with for you automatically. Anything that's not necessarily an app icon, but just an image asset that you might have in your application, just provide what the highest resolution is. If you have it in a higher resolution than what you actually need it, you can actually downscale it from there. You can do all kinds of different things. You can add a watermark image to any icon or image that you want. We can actually draw a banner, so you get like a little thing and you can position it on the top or in one of the corners. You can control what the text is, what the font of the text is, the color of the text, the background. You can do like whole custom gradients with it. So very, very powerful API. And then you can also generate multiple outputs for that one input image. And a couple of examples to kind of give you some ideas on this. On Android, you commonly see like there's an icon and then the launcher foreground, which is basically the same icon, but it's kind of scaled a little bit differently. Well, you can have that same input image do both of them for you. So you don't have to have multiple versions of the same thing over and over and over again. One of the other kind of common things, so whether you're on Android or whether you're on iOS, you probably, well, I don't want to say probably, you may, you may kind of have noticed that, you have what the actual icon is, but you want that same image to be able to use somewhere in your application. But I can't use necessarily the actual app icon from the app icon set on iOS, and I may not be able to use the bitmap resource very easily from within my application. Now on native code, that could be a little bit different, but certainly from Xamarin.Forms, it's not as easy. And so I can just, say, okay, well, we're going to have the bitmap resources here on Android. And then I also want it in the drawable as, this other, image. And it could be the same name. It's just in drawable instead of bitmap. You can customize the name So it's very, very powerful what you want to do. You can add backgrounds. So kind of something I see a lot that people will do is on Android, you have a transparent background on your icon. Obviously on iOS, it's kind of required that your app icon have a background color. So you could have a transparent source that you add a background color to, which is, again, in my opinion, really, really powerful to be able to do something like that. All right. So I know you're sitting there thinking like, this is just freaking amazing. Like, how does it do all of these things? And the answer is Dan is single. It's amazing what you can do, by the way, if you do not have a girlfriend or a wife or children. You just have so much more time available. All right. So let's look at kind of configuring your first, CI build here. So one of the things a lot of people love about App Center is that it is very, very easy to use. In fact, you don't have to be any kind of expert to get started with it. So it is as simple as going to App Center, saying, hey, I want to connect. And it's going to ask you, are you on Azure DevOps? Are you on GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab? And you're going to select it. All right. And then you're going to pick what branch and say configure build. It's pretty much that hard. Now it sounds hard, right? Like configure a build. One little note on iOS, it's probably going to select the solution. Do make sure you select the CS proj. That's going to drastically change your build time. Because if you're doing the solution, if it's targeting the solution, it's going to want to build every single project in there rather than just whatever the iOS project is looking at there. Obviously, you can select the Xcode version here. You can select the SDK. Oops, sorry. You can select the SDK for Xamarin iOS. You can say, I want a device build. I want a simulator build. Build this on every branch. Manually choose when to run it. And then you can also turn on this increment build number. And so that's going to kind of update your info plist. There's a very similar thing for the Android one. I kind of figured, you'd only need to see one. It's basically the same. Little tiny differences, but, iOS is probably the more complex of the two. So you can kind of choose these different things. Now, one kind of caveat that I've noticed, App Center is very good about telling you what the current version of the SDK is. What they're really bad about, however, is to tell you or to give you an option to say, I just always want to be on the latest stable or the latest preview. So they don't really give you that version. And that, in my opinion, is kind of irritating. Now, if you were to use something like the mobile build tools that I showed you before, I mentioned that you would exclude that secrets.json. So, if you're thinking, well, how do I get that in there? It's actually very easy. Even in App Center, all I have to do is turn on environment variables. I can add those variables to my build pipeline. So I can say, okay, my App Center ID was this, my backend is this, my client ID is this. And now when it builds, the mobile build tools is actually smart enough to recognize that you don't have the secrets.json locally, and it will now look at the environment to construct that secrets.json for you. So all of that is really, really easy to work with. This is actually really simplified from V1 that had a few quirks in it. But V1 is actually still really powerful. I have a lot of apps that still use it. But V2 kind of took it to the next level and just made it so much more powerful, so much easier to work with. So I don't have to think about prefixes or anything. I can just say App Center ID, backend client ID, and it will work. And with that, ta-da, you've got a CI build. It was that hard. I know you guys thought it was going to be really difficult. It isn't, at least not with App Center. But there is a reason why actually, there are a lot of reasons why I use Azure Pipelines. So a couple of reasons why I'm using Azure Pipelines. First of all, most of my builds require quite a bit more than App Center can handle, at least without scripts. So one of the great things about App Center is that you can do anything you want. I mean, you basically have root level access to the machine, and you can install anything you want under the sun. You can do. They don't necessarily advertise that very much, but you can do pretty much anything you want. But you have to write scripts. And again, my name is not Jerome LeBlanc, and I don't want to. So just because I can do something doesn't always mean I will do it. Don't tell Brian that. He swears I'm just going to do it. In any case, one of the other things I really love about it is I can define my build with YAML. And defining my build with YAML now means that it's part of my source control. And as things change, as builds break, and they will break, let's not kid ourselves, because everything that we're using, our apps are evolving, the SDKs that we're building against are evolving. And it's not just the SDKs from Xamarin, it's the SDKs from Apple and the SDKs from from Google for Android. All of these things are changing. There are a lot of moving pieces. Operating systems are being updated. Xcode is being updated. So there's just so much that's changing. Things will break. But now these are, this is now under source control, and I can go back and I can look very, very easily of who changed what, when, and why, right? But I can also do things to try to help myself, and it usually helps me. But I can use things like, oh God, all my devices this morning are like turning on, turning off. It was crazy. But I can use things like boots from Jonathan Peppers to make sure that my build host is on the latest stable version of Mono and the latest stable version of the iOS and Android SDK. If I'm building on Mac, I can actually control what version of Xcode I want. Regardless of what I'm on, I can choose what version of .NET Core that I want very, very easily. And of course, I can run unit tests. And unlike App Center, I can actually collect those tests as part of my build. So that can fail my build. That can very easily be reported. And I can go in and I can look at each test and see what passed, what didn't pass, and kind of track that over time. I can even collect code coverage as part of my build if I wanted to. But I can also do things, and if you look at a lot of the public repos that I have, some of the open source stuff, you'll see that very often, especially if I'm doing something with Xamarin, I'm going to have a lot of templates. And so these are very small, manageable pieces of YAML code that I can define like, hey, I want to make sure I have the latest NuGet version. And then I want to run NuGet restore, right? I want to make sure that I have the latest .NET SDK and then the latest NuGet version, right? I can do these things, and I can now repeat that across each of my builds. I can do that for my libraries. I can do that for my iOS or my Android build, because those are going to be different builds, right? I'm not gonna want to do that all at one time. It takes too bloody long. But that's another story for another day. But I can also do some things, like I can use community built templates, like the ones from Nick Randolph. And I'm not going to go into his templates here today, but I definitely encourage you guys to check it out. And so you can go to pipelinetemplates.com, which is the website that he set up for the community, where you can go and you can see all of these pre-done YAML templates that you don't have to control if you don't like. You could, right? You can download them. They're all open source. But you can just use the templates to make your YAML definition of what you need even easier, and just simplify your life. So lots of different options for you that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. So what does that pipeline kind of look like? Well, we're going to do things kind of the most basic way, right? Like, so many of us, and this is kind of, I think, one of the problems. Uh, it has become so easy in Visual Studio to just say, build and run and deploy. And now, everything just kind of works, right? Like I clicked a button, it looks like a little play icon and I clicked it. And a couple minutes later, it finished building and then it deployed to my iPhone and look at this, right? Or it deployed to my Android device and it's amazing. Um, but it also kind of makes us a lazy developer. And so there's a lot of power in actually understanding how some of these things work and kind of breaking things down, right? It's the same kind of process that goes into being a developer, right? So if you remember all the way back to when you were just starting out as a developer, and you went to university, and the instructor goes, okay, print something on the console, and you're like, okay, now how do I do that? Like, do I just write this 10 times, or do I do like a while loop, or for loop or something, right? And you have to kind of think through this, like, is there an if involved in this? Is there a loop involved in this? Like, and you start breaking it down the same way that we do in our code. It's the same thing here, right? So what are these different steps? Well, we need to install the Apple certificate. If we don't have an Apple certificate and we don't have a provisioning profile, we're not going to get very far in building our iOS app, right? But then there are some other things that we can do. And I know you guys probably haven't heard of him. There's this little known member of the community. His name is James Montemagno. Um, like I said, very obscure guy. You've probably never heard of him, but he actually has some helpers for Azure DevOps that you can install from the marketplace into your instance. And there's some things in there where you can do that bundle versioning, right, for iOS or Android. And you can use that build number. And I believe it also does the timestamp as well. I never use it. I only ever do the build ID, to be honest. But you can do that, so that way you can get your version name, you can get your version code, and then you can choose, like, if you want to print it so you can kind of see it in the logs and stuff like that. And so, I mean, this is what we're going to do. And if you couldn't figure this out, by the way, from the names here, this is actually from the Prism CI build. So if you were to go to the Prism repo right now and look at our Azure pipeline, all of this is there because we're building iOS and Android apps as part of every single CI build that we do. And we actually do this for both Uno and for Xamarin.Forms, which is why our pipeline takes like 45 minutes to complete for everything. But, definitely you can check this out. Like, if you miss something, don't feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But then again, you notice I'm using a template here. And so I'm saying, hey, I have this step and I want to set the runtime. And then I want to prepare my build. And then I'm going to go here and I want to actually build my iOS project, right? And so now I'm going to pass in, like, okay, here's where the actual CS project is and everything else. So I'm keeping things really nice and clean as much as I can. And while I don't have the screenshots for each of those templates, I guess I'll kind of explain here. I kind of already did, but so like in here, in the set runtime is where I'm saying, like, let's go get that mono runtime. Let's ensure we have the latest Xamarin SDK for iOS and Android. Let's make sure that we have the latest, or we have the correct .NET Core SDK that we're going to need to build Prism or your app, right? Like, it's not just about Prism, even though it's the pipeline for it. So it's very, very simple here to kind of split these things up here. All right. And then finally, After you've built everything, and you've published the artifact, which is your IPA or your APK. And don't forget, by the way, if you're doing this and you've got your iOS build, be sure that you take that sim folder that gets generated. It's all the symbols. So if you ever look at App Center and you have logs that kind of come in, like especially from crashes, because they're not really going to do it for analytics, like the user went to the homepage, the user logged in. But if you have crashes, they're going to need symbols, so that way they can kind of give you more valuable information there. And so you want to always kind of make sure you grab that, so third parties like App Center can have access to those symbols. But after all of that, you're going to have some sort of deployment, probably, right? Now, you could go direct to the App Store. You could go to App Center. You could go to, whatever you can think of, right? Like you could go to, I don't know, Azure Storage. You can FTP it to your company server. And you can have some sort of deployment where you take, that IPA and the APK, and we're going to distribute it somewhere. And so all of this is very, very easy to do. So I can still use the bits and pieces of App Center that I want. I can still do UI testing if I want. Now, there are some limits to that, by the way, like, and this has been one of my chief complaints on UI tests for quite a while, besides the fact that they take forever. They never actually kind of call back. Like, there is no callback to say, hey, the UI test failed. So that's a manual, go check it. But you can still send it off for UI testing. You can still send it out to deploy to App Center. So it's not one or the other. It's just giving you more fine-grained control over the steps that you wanted to do. If you want to do, like I said, unit tests, you can do those unit tests. You just have a lot more options available to you. Now, this is kind of one of the older, this is like the older style release from Azure Pipelines instead of the YAML base. But what I do like about it and why I want to kind of show this here is it gives you a really good visual representation for what your pipeline might look like. And I do want to take a moment to kind of thank the Telerik team, because I stole this from them. But this is actually for one of their demo apps that they have. And so, you'll see, like, when they check things in, like they're getting this iOS App Center deployment kind of coming in. So they've already built it. So they have all their artifacts, and then they're deploying to App Center for iOS, Android, and UWP. And then they also do a deployment for their web API. And then there's, this gate. So was that okay, right? And then they go to their beta stage. And you can do all of this in YAML, by the way. You just don't get the pretty picture. But you can still define these things. You can still, make one deployment reliant on another. And you can provide gates so that way a certain environment cannot go kind of too, like you can't get out to that environment without some sort of approval or without a certain amount of time passing. And so all of these different things are possible. And then finally, at the end, we're going out to production. So this is kind of what your pipeline is going to look like, or could look like, I should say. What your pipeline should look like is entirely up to you and what your business needs are. But I really hope that this gives you some ideas on kind of what it can look like and what you can do, some of the power that you have that you can leverage. And so, yeah, with that, that's all I have for you this morning. And I know it's a little challenging here as far as, people being able to kind of ask questions. But if anybody has anything that they would like to ask now, certainly do it. If, you need to kind of come back with questions, you're trying to scratch your head and digest it all, don't worry. You can always, again, ping me on Twitter. If you're, following me on Twitch, always jump into chat and ask me a question. If you have comments or whatever you want to leave on YouTube, that's always great as well. Now I do see here there's a question from Paul. We're currently using Atlassian tools, Bitbucket, Bamboo, etc. What's your opinion on which tooling is better, App Center, Atlassian for Xamarin projects? To be honest, I never really got into Bamboo. I mean, Bitbucket is great. I used Bitbucket for a very long time. I don't anymore, but I couldn't really tell you much about Bamboo as far as how it compares. It just wasn't really something that I got into. So I couldn't give you a direct comparison there, unfortunately. But again, like with App Center, I mean, it's going to be very, very simplistic. But if you want to do anything more than that, really simple, I just have a basic build, you're going to be writing scripts really quickly. So Mark asked, does Azure Pipelines support GitLab or only GitHub? So Azure Pipelines actually does support GitLab. They actually support any Git provider. So if you have a custom Git provider, it will work with that.
Dan, thank you very much. That was really interesting. As someone who has set up a much more primitive version of this using Jenkins and coded everything by hand, I am just so jealous of what is possible here. And I will look into that the next time we have to do something like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, guys, and definitely enjoy David's talk. I know I'm looking forward to it as well. I mean, .NET MAUI, it's the future.